Good day, everyone, and welcome back to Murder Mysteries, the channel where America's most disturbing criminal cases are examined with precision, depth, and a commitment to uncovering the truth behind the headlines. Today's case involves a former television news anchor whose familiar face once greeted Wichita viewers with morning broadcasts, weather reports, and community updates. Now, that same face appears in a courtroom under circumstances so tragic, so unexpected, and so deeply unsettling that the community continues to struggle with the shock. This is the case of former broadcaster Angie Mock, a woman once known for her clear delivery and cheerful on-air presence, now accused of stabbing her 81-year-old mother, Anita Avers, to death on Halloween. Before we continue, please do not forget to like and subscribe. Continued support helps this channel keep bringing detailed reporting on America's most complex and troubling criminal cases, and ensures that unfolding developments reach viewers quickly and accurately. This case has already been the subject of intense local interest. Wichita authorities were called to the scene late on Halloween night, following a call from Mock herself. According to police reports, she had informed dispatchers that she had stabbed her mother and said she had to stab her to save herself. When officers arrived, they found her covered in blood. Her mother, Anita Avers, was unresponsive from multiple stab wounds. Emergency personnel were unable to revive her. Angie Mock was taken into custody and transported first for medical evaluation, then to the Sedgwick County Jail. Very quickly, what had already begun as an emotional and bizarre crime scene escalated into a high-profile case that raised questions about family conflict, mental health, self-defense, and the contrast between public personas and private struggles. During her first court appearance, which took place earlier this week, the woman once recognized for her composed on-air presence entered the courtroom in tears. She appeared visibly emotional, often crying, although cameras caught a brief moment in which she smiled. That fleeting expression created a wave of public confusion and fueled online discussion. Some viewers believed it signaled a break from reality or emotional instability. Others interpreted the moment as nervousness or shock. Her demeanor, regardless of interpretation, added another layer of complexity to a case that was already raising difficult questions. Mock has been charged with first-degree murder. Prosecutors argued that the brutality of the crime and the evidence recovered at the scene warranted the highest level of homicide charge under Kansas law. Because first-degree murder in Kansas includes intentional and premeditated killings, the charge alone suggests that investigators found sufficient evidence to believe the act was not merely a spontaneous reaction, but potentially intentional or deliberate in nature. However, her attorney submitted a request for a competency evaluation, temporarily halting the case until Mock can be professionally assessed. In Kansas, such requests are taken seriously, especially in cases where defendants show signs of emotional or psychological instability. A competency evaluation focuses not on whether the defendant was mentally well at the time of the crime, but whether the defendant can currently understand the courtroom proceedings and assist in her own defense. If a judge determines that a defendant cannot comprehend the process or communicate effectively, the law requires that treatment or stabilization occur before the case continues. This request signals that Mock's legal team is likely preparing to consider mental health as a central component of her defense strategy. While the legal team has not yet stated whether they plan to pursue an insanity defense or diminished capacity defense, the competency evaluation indicates that concerns exist about her current state of mind. For many in Wichita, the news has been almost impossible to reconcile. Angie Mock had been a familiar figure on local television for years. Viewers who watch her deliver news broadcasts have been grappling with the image of a woman once associated with professionalism and public trust, now being escorted into a courtroom in handcuffs. The contrast has led to widespread discussion, including questions about whether she had been struggling privately with issues that were not visible on screen. Mock is being held on a $1 million bond. Bond amounts in homicide cases are determined by the seriousness of the allegations, the potential risk to public safety, and a likelihood that the defendant may flee. The seven-figure bond underscores the gravity with which Kansas prosecutors are treating this case. Her next hearing is scheduled for November 14th, but that date may shift depending on the outcome of the competency evaluation. The decision by prosecutors to move forward with a first-degree murder charge so quickly suggests that investigators believed early evidence strongly supported the theory of intentional homicide. The crime occurred inside the home shared by Mock and her mother. Police reports describe significant blood at the scene, a kitchen knife believed to be the weapon, and physical injuries consistent with a violent confrontation. At this time, law enforcement has not publicly released information regarding whether there were signs of forced entry, defensive wounds, or evidence supporting Mock's claim of self-defense. The self-defense statement itself, however, has drawn significant attention. In Kansas, self-defense claims require that the person reasonably believed force was necessary to prevent imminent death or bodily harm. These claims become especially complicated in incidents involving family members, particularly elderly ones, because investigators must determine whether the threat described could reasonably have existed. Angie Mock's mother, Anita Avers, was 81 years old. Investigators have not disclosed whether she had any known medical conditions or mobility limitations, but her age alone raises questions about the plausibility of the threat described by Mock. Was there an argument? Was there a history of conflict? Were there any known patterns of abuse, manipulation, or mental health crises within the home? At this stage, none of those answers have been provided publicly, and police have been tight-lipped about the family's history. The request for a competency evaluation indicates that Mock's legal counsel may believe mental health played a role, either before the crime, during the crime, or as part of the reason she cannot currently participate in the legal process. It is not unusual for high-stress, high-visibility cases involving family violence to include questions about psychological wellness, cognitive decline, or emotional breakdowns. The fact that the court agreed to pause proceedings until an evaluation is complete shows that there is at least some potential concern that must be addressed before the case can move forward. However, it is also important to understand that a competency evaluation does not determine guilt or innocence. It is simply a pause button on the legal process, one that ensures defendants are mentally able to participate. If doctors find her competent, the case will resume. If they find her incompetent, she will be ordered to undergo mental health treatment until her condition changes. 9 p.m. saw anything that suggested ongoing conflict. Others noted that they occasionally saw mother and daughter together, but never witnessed visible tension. These accounts, while useful for establishing general background, do not shed light on what occurred on Halloween night. It is not uncommon for private conflicts, especially those involving mental health, to remain completely invisible to the outside world. The timing of the incident, occurring on Halloween, has only intensified public interest. Holidays often carry emotional weight, and some criminologists note an increase in domestic incidents during holidays or high-stress times. Whether the date played any role in the confrontation remains unknown. What is known is that the holiday evening ended in tragedy, and the consequences will reverberate through Wichita and beyond. Mock's courtroom appearance has been dissected by many who followed the case, with particular attention given to her emotional display and the moment she smiled. Body language experts who analyzed the footage for local media outlets described a range of interpretations, from involuntary stress reactions to possible dissociation. Dissociation can occur in individuals experiencing overwhelming fear or trauma, causing facial expressions that may appear out of place. Others propose that the smile may have been an inappropriate attempt at composure, a common behavior in individuals who feel overwhelmed or disoriented. Her tears, however, were unmistakable and frequent. The visual contrast between the composed anchor viewers once knew and the crying defendant now standing before the court has become a central feature of the narrative surrounding this case. These emotional displays raise legitimate legal and diagnostic questions that are likely to become critical elements in courtroom arguments. The judge overseeing the proceeding acknowledged the emotional complexity while making clear that the legal standards remain unchanged. The charge is first-degree murder. The victim is an elderly woman. The defendant admits to the stabbing. The question now becomes whether the act was intentional, whether the defendant was aware of her actions, and whether self-defense holds any merit against forensic and testimonial evidence. In Kansas, first-degree murder is one of the most serious charges an individual can face. If found guilty, the penalty can include life imprisonment. Prosecutors must prove that the defendant acted intentionally or with premeditation. Premeditation does not necessarily require evidence of long-term planning. In some cases, Kansas courts have found that premeditation can occur in moments, even seconds, if the defendant formed the intent before the act was committed. Self-defense claims require substantial proof. It will become the responsibility of Mock's legal team to demonstrate that she truly believed she faced imminent harm from her 81-year-old mother. Prosecutors, in turn, will attempt to show that such a belief was unreasonable or fabricated. Forensic evidence will play a major role. Blood spatter patterns, positions of the wounds, the location of a knife, and the physical layout of the home will provide investigators with insights into the sequence of events. If Avers was seated, asleep, or otherwise unable to pose a threat, that evidence would contradict Mock's claim. If there were signs of struggle, overturned furniture, or defensive wounds on either individual, that evidence will shape the courtroom arguments. The upcoming competency evaluation will likely include psychological interviews, cognitive assessments, behavioral observations, and analysis of any available medical or mental health history. If reports emerge indicating long-term mental health concerns, the defense could introduce those findings in future proceedings. At this point in the investigation, the public remains in a state of uncertainty. The case is still in its earliest stages. New details, including forensic findings, witness statements, and psychological evaluations, will eventually provide clarity. But the emotional impact of the case is already profound. Wichita residents who once watched Angie Mock on morning news shows now see her behind a courtroom podium, wiping tears from her face, a defendant in one of Kansas's most disturbing recent domestic homicide cases. This is only the beginning of a deeply complicated and heartbreaking story, one that involves a former public figure, an elderly mother, a violent confrontation, and a community struggling to understand how such an outcome became possible. The early stages of every homicide case are shaped by questions, contradictions, and intense emotional weight. The case involving former news anchor Angie Mock has already demonstrated how the initial facts of a crime can ignite national debate, even before investigators complete their work. In Wichita, the community continues to follow each development with a sense of disbelief, attempting to reconcile the image of a once familiar media figure with the grim allegations now unfolding in court. As the competency evaluation moves forward, its findings will determine how the case proceeds. But the evaluation itself does not answer the core questions that investigators must eventually present to a jury. Those questions involve motive, behavior, state of mind, and the physical evidence surrounding the fatal stabbing of 81-year-old Anita Avers. The home where the stabbing occurred has become a silent center of investigation. Neighbors who passed by in the days following the incident observed officers entering and leaving with bags of evidence. Crime scene tape surrounded the property for several days as forensic teams documented the space. These teams likely photographed every room, collected samples of blood evidence, measured distances between critical objects, and searched for signs of struggle. Even the smallest detail, a misplaced chair, a dropped item, a broken object, can hold meaning in domestic homicide cases. Investigators will use these details to reconstruct the events leading up to the moment when Angie Mock made her emergency call. The 911 call itself will become a critical piece of evidence. Dispatch calls often reveal a defendant's emotional state, clarity of thought, and immediate explanation of events. Mock reportedly told dispatchers that she had to stab her mother to save herself, a statement that raises immediate legal implications. Self-defense claims require that the threat be imminent and unavoidable. In many cases, defendants describing self-defense express fear, panic, confusion, and urgency. Prosecutors will carefully analyze her tone, her word choices, and any inconsistencies between the call and later statements. The 911 call will also help determine whether Mock sought immediate help or delayed contacting authorities. A rapid call sometimes supports a claim that the defendant acted under perceived threat. A delayed call, on the other hand, can lead prosecutors to argue that the defendant needed time to construct a narrative. At this stage, investigators have not released the full call, but once played in court, it will become a central feature of legal arguments. Another major question concerns the presence of defensive wounds. If investigators find that Avers had defensive cuts on her arms or hands, it may indicate she attempted to shield herself from the attack. If Mock has wounds on her hands, arms, or torso, those injuries could suggest a struggle or could be consistent with an accidental cut from hand.